Hi, everyone. Jared Mondschein here, Director of Research, as Mike said. Thanks so much for joining us today. It means so much to see such a large room for the second year in a row now, us launching a report like this. So that polling you have on your tables, that's similar to last year. We asked 1,000 people in Australia, 1,000 people in Japan, 1,000 people in the US about a number of issues. But as Mike said, a lot of people do polls. What's different about ours? What we really want to do is road test some really specific scenarios to really get down in the weeds on what do people actually think about nuclear-powered submarines? What do people actually think about, going broader than that, strategic competition? And most importantly, how does it end? How do people want it to end? What's the next step on this? So that's how we did this report. But before I move on, to the actual report, I wanted to quickly do a poll of the room. You may have seen Intelligence Squared debates. What we want to do is, if you could, get out your phone and scan this QR code. You are then going to get a survey, if I could ask you to fill out, and I promise you it is anonymous. And we're asking folks in the room same questions we asked Americans, Australian, and Japanese respondents. And you're in the report, you can skip ahead and cheat and see what they said, but I prefer you didn't, and actually just answer it for yourselves. And at the end of the program, we are going to do this poll once again, and to see if any ideas or thoughts changed from at the beginning of the day. As Mike's outlined, we have a large program, and so we just want to first get a feel of the room, vibe check, as the young kids say these days. I'll now move on to Victoria.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. We wanted to start with our headline finding, which is that China is resoundingly seen as most likely to be the most influential country in Asia. While the three countries don't hope this is the outcome, they are not necessarily expecting war. We asked our publics what they think the most likely outcome of strategic competition is, as you can see there. And overwhelmingly, China's military and economic dominance is seen as most likely. 63% of Australians, 51% of Americans, and 51% of Japanese think that China will be the most likely to be the most economically and militarily influential in Asia in 25 years. Half that number of Australians, so about 32%, and Americans, 26%, and significantly fewer Japanese would say the same of the United States. But we didn't just ask what they thought of strategic competition, we also asked what they wanted from it. And this is clearly not the preferred outcome. Those in all three countries who think the collapse of the Chinese Communist Party would be good for their country outnumber those that don't by around a margin of 10-1. Over half the respondents in all three countries say China does more harm than good in Asia. Only 10% of Australians, 10% of Americans, and 4% of Japanese think Chinese dominance in Asia is good for their country, versus 41% of Australians, 47% of Americans, and 21% of Japanese who think US dominance in Asia is good for their country. But despite all of this, our most intriguing finding, and figure 1 in our report, shows decreasing numbers of Australians think war with China is very likely. In 2022, 21% of Australians said war with China was very likely, and this year, 14%, so 7% less, said the same. And an increasing number say war with China is very unlikely, with 7% more Australians saying war is very unlikely in 10 years' time.
Now, that's a statement, but I feel like it could also be a question mark. Is deterrence working? My perception of this polling is that the Australian people are convinced that maybe it is working. Amidst massive investments in Australia's military, amidst, despite a lot of rhetoric, we saw after the rollout of the AUKUS, the plans on AUKUS, that China was not exactly excited for AUKUS. It's not exactly excited for US allies and partners joined together, because we know, in my view, that it is actually one of the most effective ways to counter Chinese efforts in the region that are revisionist. But what we wanted to show here is the way that there's a lot of people who just don't know about what's going on in AUKUS. It resonates a lot in Australia, but less so in Japan and less so in the US. Yet, as much as they don't know, they are overwhelmingly, significantly more in favor of AUKUS than against. Those who actually disagree with AUKUS, who say that it actually makes Asia less safe, you can see in the red there, pretty small. And you may have seen from some domestic politics here in Australia about a lot of resentment towards AUKUS in the Labour Party, especially at the Labour Party conference. And again, that's actually not as significant. So the headlines may say something about AUKUS, but the people are somewhere else. Move on to the next one. This is something that's really interesting. This is, again, going down deep into the weeds on where the where Australia is on AUKUS. You can see Australians really think it's going to be great for jobs, but at the same time, they don't seem to be convinced that it's worth the cost. And they also are seemingly a bit maybe concerned or maybe accepting of the fact that it will likely it will support the United States in an armed conflict, that somehow AUKUS really ties Australia to the US more. Is that the abandonment entanglement issue? Not sure. But I think it shows, in my view, a nuanced perception of AUKUS. It is not all excellent news. It is not all terrible news, despite what the headlines may say about it. And again, it's important to note the partisan breakdown of where different parties in Australia view AUKUS, how they view AUKUS, and how it is not as polarized politically as some may think, especially coming from America as an American. I think I wish we could have Australian levels of polarization sometimes.
So it's not only that deterrence might possibly be working, but we also see that alliances increase feelings of security. Our headline finding last year was the overwhelming view that alliances made all three countries, America, Japan, and Australia, feel more secure. And while fewer say the same this year as they did in 2022, it is still a majority view. So 53% of Americans say their alliance with Australia makes them safer. 54% of Australians say the same of the US. 52% of Americans say Japan makes it safer, and 55% of Japanese say the same of the US. And so it might have come down from its historic highs last year, but the overall trend of recognising the security benefits of alliances still skews upwards. These findings can also be found in your reports on your tables.
And just very last point on this is that there's a lot of ambition with AUKUS and other trilateral initiatives. A lot of allies and partners wanting to do more. But what I've been saying for a long time, I've been doing polling at the US Study Center since I arrived in 2017. And the way that the US, Australia, Japan, and other allies and partners see the challenge is ever more the same. A lot of people see the challenge, and a lot of people see the general broad solution the same. China is a challenge, revisionist China is a challenge, and the solution is working with allies and partners. But now, and this event today is the sort that we go to the next step and say, okay, working with allies and partners, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do we make the hard choices to actually work with allies and partners in a way that's actually the most effective? So with that, I'll move to Mike.